welcome Ashlea Halpern and Andrew Parks to join us here and share their story about their journey to Minnesota. So Ashlea and Andrew have actually traveled the world. They originally met in New York, and through all their travels, something about Minnesota just stuck, and they decided to make Minnesota their home. And they are now running and they are now sharing all of their adventures through their Instagram feed, Minneavangelists, and their blog, minneavangelists.com, which I have to say I love following, especially the recent article about how to find fair food, even though we're not having the Minnesota State Fair. So for people who don't know, Minnesota State Fair is a religion in Minnesota. It's like the following is insane, and unfortunately due to COVID it's not happening this year, but there are ways to still get your fair food, which you both were able to share. So Ashlea and Andrew, I want to say welcome to the fly-in program. Thanks for joining us. Tell me about your story. It's so interesting how you met, and then how did you end up in Minnesota?
All right.
How we met,
Well, how we met 18 years ago. I was his editor at the student newspaper. He was my pop music critic. We lived in New York for a long time, about 10 years. And we were working, he was mostly freelance and I was working as a magazine editor. And then in fall of 2014, I had to travel. I got tired of being told, oh, you only have 10 days and what can you see in 10 days? You're going to spend 2 of those days traveling. So we started by taking a year off to travel, and we went to 17 countries in Asia and Australia. And then a year became 2 years, became 3 years, became almost 4.
It's more like 3 months became 6 months, became not, because I was my handle is the reluctant traveler. I haven't traveled as much as her.
This was my idea.
It was her idea. I was along for it. And then it just kept getting, the trip just kept getting extended.
Longer. Yeah. And so we lived in Asia for a while in Bangkok. We came back to the US and we always thought, okay, we're going to go from New York to LA. That's it. New York, LA, New York, LA. Everyone we knew lived in either California or on the East Coast. But then we started to price it out and kind of look at the quality of life and what we were going to get. And we realized that we weren't going to have a better quality of life in LA than what we'd experienced in New York. And also when I started ironing out the logistics of how do we move our stuff there, I realized there were all these things I wanted to see in the US in between California and New York. So we set off and did a long US road trip. It was about 16 months, split up into 2 parts. We visited 40 states and 229 cities. And the entire time I kept a Google Doc, like a Google rankings doc, and I would keep a top 10 list of places we would consider moving when this was all over. And we didn't know anyone in Minnesota. We knew one friend in Minnesota. We had no family here. We didn't have jobs here. But she was always posting on Instagram all these beautiful like park shots and coffee shops, and just like the quality of life seemed really nice. So we're like, okay, we'll go check it out. We came here in 2017 for a month, and we liked it so much we extended it by 6 weeks. And this was in fall. So everyone was like, if you're serious about Minnesota,
the best weather.
You need to come back in winter. See if you're really serious. So we came back in February of 2018, and we loved it so much we moved here.
Wow. What was it about Minnesota that really captivated you?
It just combined so many things that we loved about so many places. At this point, we'd been to hundreds of cities around the world. It was the arts and culture scene. It was the diversity. It was the food. Oh my God, the food and restaurants that get overlooked sometimes by national media in ways that are crazy if you've ever actually been here and eaten here.
I think there was a really good energy. I mean, the more we traveled around the US, it just kind of felt like a period of time where a lot of cities like Minneapolis were just like in a good period of transition. That
there was just like a can-do attitude. Like everyone we met here was like, it was like you'd found their secret. They loved it here, and people loved that you loved it here. Whereas some other cities we would go to, and I won't name names, but like they kind of had a chip on their shoulder, like, ugh, New Yorkers moving here, or ugh, like you're gonna run it. It wasn't like that here. People were super excited to have you embrace all the things that they loved about Minnesota too. So we really responded to that optimism and the positivity and just the sense of, like Prince said, the cold keeps the bad people out. Like there's just so much possibility here, and we really responded to that.
I totally agree. We moved here, my husband and I moved here with our daughter from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and totally same experience when you're coming from California to other states or cities. There's definitely this like, oh, we don't want, those type of people here. Minnesota, people are so excited that they're like, wow, somebody from California wants to live in Minnesota. Yeah, like we're winning, because there is this artificial sense of a barrier with like weather and being in the middle of the country. But people just don't realize like how vibrant the community and culture are here, which is exciting to discover when you get here. And you're taking that discovery in a very public way by sharing it out on Minneavangelists. What was the inspiration for starting Minneavangelist?
I got so tired of our friends on the East and West Coast being like, Minnesota, really? Like their only association was that we decided to move into like a documentary about Siberia. Or like Prince and snow. That's like all they knew. And we just wanted to show, no, there's like so many other reasons to love Minnesota. And that's why what started the blog was just counting out those
to answer
reasons.
The question that people would always ask, which is why Minnesota? I mean, even people here living in Minnesota were like, why did you move here? I mean, we love it here, but why are you here?
They're like, wait, you don't have family here? What?
Yeah, and it wasn't in an inquisitive, like, why are you here kind of way. It's just like a genuine interest, So it was a way to keep answering that question. And we have a running doc now of just more reasons to love, and we just keep adding to it. So I don't see us
We've
running
only
out of it anytime
published
soon.
Like 178 reasons so far, but our list of the ones we need to get to is well over 1,000.
Yeah, I think it's just important with the site just to show the diversity of things to do here, and just to move past this idea. Yes, it's cold, but there's just so many aspects to Minneapolis that we love.
There's also this idea, like I'm sure you felt this in San Francisco. In New York, okay, so there's 300 coffee shops. How many coffee shops do you really need? Is 30 great ones enough? Because the Twin Cities has that. And you can kind of apply that to, okay, do you need 7,000 restaurants, or is 1,000 great restaurants enough? So
the food is so good here. Like people do not understand how good, and I'm a total foodie. So that was definitely one of the allures when I started getting to know the area better. I was like, we can move here because not only is the food so good, but it's half the price, of eating out in New York or San Francisco as well. So you can actually go to a super great restaurant, highly rated restaurant, and pay a significant amount less and have the same experience, and the people are super friendly. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. How do you source all the material? You're talking about this 1,000 item list of what you love about Minnesota. Where are you getting these ideas from?
I think just through our experiences being reporters for so many years and doing that trip around the US, we just naturally like try to dig stuff up because we get enjoyment out of it, but also just we want to share with other people.
Yeah, and my job is a travel writer, so I'm very used to plunging into new destinations and having to work really quickly to suss out what's cool and what's interesting and what's unique about a place. And that's the thing here, whatever you can think of, whatever you're hung up, maybe if you live in San Francisco or New York, whatever you're hung up on, we probably have a version of it here. And we have half a dozen Liberian restaurants here. We have the largest Hmong diaspora in the country, the largest Somali diaspora in the country. And there's so much culture and food and people to meet and things to experience built around that. You just have to seek it out.
Yeah, in that way, it's kind of a microcosm of what we liked about New York City, just the different neighborhoods you would see in different communities. Yeah.
So we've talked about all the great things that attracted you to Minnesota. Let's do some real talk and talk about what has been the biggest challenge moving to Minnesota.
I did have to trade in I had this like worthless Nissan hatchback that literally slid backwards in the snow on hills. We had to get a real car with like real wheels. So that was one thing, but and that's the thing about the winter. It's all about your mindset. Like we decide to be grown-ups and wear layers, and it's fine. And there's so much to do. Like, we have art festivals that take place on frozen lakes here. We've gone dog sledding, we've gone ice fishing, we took our first cross-country skiing lessons. It's not like you're going to be holed up for 4 months or 6 months with nothing to do. People here get outside, they embrace the winter, and we find that really inspiring.
I grew up in Alaska, and we have a saying that there is no bad weather, just bad gear. And I think that totally obviously applies in Minnesota as well. Like,
for sure.
I mean, I grew up in Buffalo, and my family there were like, how do you handle the cold? And it's like, Buffalo is way worse because we had so much snow. And I feel like people there don't embrace the cold so much as they do here, you know?
And isn't Buffalo one of the snowiest places in the U.S.?
Yes. And we keep telling them
hundreds of inches of snow. And they just, you know, they wouldn't have a thing like an art festival on a frozen lake like we do here, you know?
Minnesotans love winter, and I love that. Like, there's tons of, like you're saying, frozen ice fishing festivals. There's art festivals that happen all winter. We really do try to make the most of every season. Like, I feel like every season has like a really, like a pinnacle event that happens that can draw people outdoors and connecting. How have you found like making friends here and finding your own community?
I was just joking about this leather. I feel like, no shade to like my friends in New York, but I feel like I see my friends more here for sure. And my friends aren't just through work. In New York, it's like you work all the time. So the only friends you have time for are the ones you work with. Here we have, I would say, a really good crew of people that we've met through all different means.
Yeah, it's kind of just a nice mix of people.
Yeah, it hasn't been, and we heard that it would be hard to make friends here. And I would say most of the friends we have are either also transplants or they're Minnesotans who moved away and came back. But our friends are awesome here, and we actually have time to see them. And I think that's a really critical distinction from our lives on the East Coast.
You bring up a really good point about just how the quality of life has changed, or how it's different from New York. You mentioned like working all the time in New York, and just like we have the same thing about coming from the Bay Area, like that frenetic energy where it's just like hustle all the time. Yeah. You get to Minnesota and you kind of like this underlying stress that you've been carrying around for years that you didn't even realize anymore just kind of falls away, and it feels like you can breathe a little more easily. I don't know, did you feel like that when you moved to Minnesota? Just this like, it's more calm?
Yes, the pace of life was a huge selling point. And just like how outdoorsy people are here, there's just so much green space here. I feel like
parks.
That is just a big draw.
Yeah.
You know?
I even feel like we go back to New York, I have to go back for work things, and I like get anxiety now just sometimes being in New York, and I just can't wait. Like, I want to kiss the ground at MSP every time I land back in Minnesota. One, because MSP is the best airport in the world, or at least the country. And two, it's just, like all of that stress falls away, and you can and especially in the pandemic now, I mean, we pay the same as what we paid in New York for 3 times the space. We have a front yard and a backyard, and being locked at home all the time, like having that green space, being able to go outside to be away from people.
Yeah, or away from your partner. I mean, we probably wouldn't be having this interview right now if we were still in New York during a pandemic, but yeah.
What are some of the, I'm gonna pause for a second. Tell me a little bit more about, as you're exploring Minnesota, is there a favorite thing that you found, or a favorite neighborhood that you like to go back to? Or do you want to share a little bit about the neighborhood that you found? It sounds like, did you buy a house? Were you able to buy a house? Are you renting?
No, we're renting right now. We live in Regina Field, Northrop, which is sort of south of Powderhorn.
Which are all Minneapolis neighborhoods.
Right. It's the thing here is it's like the best of the suburbs in that you get space and you get yards and things like that, but you're very much in a city. We are, a mile from Minnehaha Creek. We can take a bike down there in 3 minutes and then ride for 4 hours if we wanted on the interconnected bikeways. Like, this is an incredible place for biking. for any sort of outdoors activity. And it's just so accessible. Whereas when we were living in Brooklyn, if you want to go to Central Park, it's like a 45 minutes on the train. And then you get to start your outdoors experiment.
And then you have to fight with the walkers if you're a biker and if you're a
right,
walker,
the congestion, whereas like there's so many parks here, so many different green spaces that you, unless you go to the most popular lakes, you can really spread out. You can really get away from people in the pandemic. And then if you go 10 minutes outside the city or even an hour, you can be in cornfields, you can be in the Northwoods, you can be just in the middle of nowhere and have all that breathing room.
I think there's something for everyone in terms of the neighborhoods. Like we picked the neighborhood that we're in right now just because it's just more families and it's a little more quiet. But if you're in your 20s and you want more of that energy and you want to live within walking distance of a coffee shop and some restaurants and stuff, there's other neighborhoods like Uptown and other parts of
or you can
Minneapolis
get with the condos downtown if you never want to be out, if you never want to touch snow. You have the skyways interconnecting. You can go straight from your, well, when you could go to an office, from your apartment to your office to all the restaurants you want.
And St. Paul's right next door, so it's like 2 cities for the price of 1.
Yeah. We're like the biggest fans of St. Paul. Some of our friends are very like Minneapolis and won't go to St. Paul. We will go. We love, it feels like having 2 great American cities in one.
That you bring up such a funny idiosyncrasy of the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul, and my Minneapolis friends make fun of us, and they're like, "Oh, how's like retirement? How's your like vacation home? Like that's where people have their cabins, you know, their weekend getaways in St. Paul." It literally takes me 21 minutes to drive to work in Uptown Minneapolis, which is, you know, when I was living in the Bay Area, it took me over an hour to drive to work or take the train or whatever across. Originally we were in San Francisco, then we moved to Oakland, but I was still working in San Francisco. And it's just like, you have no idea how easy it is to get around here. And when people complain, they're like, "Oh, traffic was so bad today." It's like, yeah, my 21-minute commute was actually 28 minutes. That's how I know traffic was bad, but it like is always moving. And we have a great public transportation system here. If you don't want to have to drive, which is awesome too.
Yeah.
Traffic lasts for like a half an hour. It's like
it's
everyone
like
literally
not like a 4-hour
punches out at 5 o'clock. So just leave at 5:30 and you'll be fine.
5:15, you're golden.
That's so true. And it literally is like a tap, a faucet that you're like turning on and off. It's like there's traffic and then there's not. And it's very short amount of time, which is a huge selling point, I think, just like to be able to get around. But it is funny, once you do kind of settle in, you're like, I don't want to go to Minneapolis today. I don't want to drive the like 11 miles across the river or whatever. And it's so easy. But it is nice that like most neighborhoods have everything you need in them. You know, you have your local grocery, your local coffee shop. We have a spy house that we walk to in our neighborhood in Highland Park and all the trails. And so it's good that you have like these tight communities. It also makes it feel hard when you're like, "Oh, I don't really feel like going all the way over to like Powderhorn Park or whatever," even though it's 10
I mean, that's something else too. Like in New York, we knew our neighbor across the hall because she was our landlady, but we didn't know anyone else in our building. Here, we know the names and have the phone numbers of all 4 people, front, behind, and to both sides. And I love that feeling. Just people, like just knowing your neighbors and knowing you can invite them over or rely on them, text them when there's weird tornado sirens or something, you know, and they're like, "No, it's just a test. It's okay."
What was it like when you heard your first tornado siren?
Oh, I was like, it's the apocalypse. Like, like, is this a Stanley Kubrick film? It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I had the same experience with my first one where my husband was like down in our basement and I come down, I'm yelling for him. He's not hearing me. I'm like grabbing our daughter, grabbing our dog, running into the basement. And I get down there and he looks at me, he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Have you not been hearing the siren?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's just a test." Like, and I just started crying. It's like, "There's a tornado coming." But so that's probably not to scare anybody, but yes, tornado sirens are a thing. And once you move here, you learn that, okay, there are tests that happen and it doesn't necessarily mean, it's very rare that we get tornadoes anywhere near the Twin Cities. So for anybody who's worried about natural disasters, we really don't have that many in the Twin Cities. Well, this has been so fun getting to know both of you. I'd love to hear, kind of in closing, for people who are interested in moving to Minnesota, do you have any advice? Like, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned moving here, and what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to somebody thinking about moving here?
You want to go first?
No, you can go first.
I think we'll definitely start if you're wondering, well, what are the things you can actually do if you still have this idea that if you move here you're going to be in Siberia. Definitely, like, go to our website, Minneavangelists.com. We have written hundreds of things to do, from food and drink to arts and culture, festival. You'll find all of the stuff. So that'll answer the what can I do there. We have, if you're looking for event coverage, obviously it's a bit tamped down right now with the pandemic, but the Weekly here stays on top of, City Pages stays on top of stuff. The Star Tribune is a great resource for finding things to do. The food writers there are really great and always covering the newest openings. I do think if you visit in winter for the first time, then come back in spring, summer, or fall, because they're amazing. And if you come in spring, summer, or fall, come in winter and see how it comes alive. Like,
so don't write it off if you've come here in the winter, and vice versa. Like, if you were here in the fall, come here in the winter, see if you can handle it.
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, Greater MSP has a lot of resources for people who are new to the city and looking to connect and meet people. I do think sometimes it can feel lonely, and particularly if you were starting a new job in the pandemic and you're only meeting people over Zoom. There's so many special interest groups here. Like, whatever you're interested in, you could be a xylophone speaker who wants to practice Swahili, and there's probably a group here.
Right.
For
There's
that.
just vibrant subcultures here, things you would never think exist here that are huge little groups.
And particularly, the shopkeepers, I think, are a hidden resource here. They're so knowledgeable about everything. They're excellent curators of their cities. And even if, for example, if you're interested in the literary arts, this is the best place in the country. There are publishing houses. There are, 24 bookstores here, some of them super niche. There's book art centers. Basically, and you know what? You can reach out to us too. We're constantly exploring this stuff. Like, send us a DM on Instagram. If you're curious about, does Minneapolis have, or the Twin Cities have X, ask us. We probably want to know the answer to that too, and we will research it and find it out for you.
I think it's also important to say we've barely touched upon just Minnesota as a whole is awesome. Like, something we do with the website, it's not just the Twin Cities. We explore all over the state. And that's another nice thing, because you're not in traffic for an hour just in Minneapolis. You can spend that hour going to surrounding cities from here, or you can go to the North Shore.
Day trips, weekend trips. And also there's awesome cities nearby, like, don't knock Des Moines, don't knock Fargo, don't knock Milwaukee. These places also have loads of stuff going on. We routinely take weekend trips to them. And
it was a big reason why we moved here, was just to be in a different part of the country and explore all the surrounding states as well. You're not far from Chicago as well, and Milwaukee.
And my attitude is, if you don't come here and experience it yourself, like, you're only doing a disservice to yourself. You're missing out.
Well, I can't argue with that. Everybody should come and visit Minneapolis, or I should say Minnesota, at least once, for sure. Probably
St. Paul too.
Yes, I'm partial to St. Paul, the sleepy St. Paul. Awesome. Well, Ashlea and Andrew, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And we're looking forward to jumping into a live AMA with you today later, so people can actually ask you questions live about your experience. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about everything that happens in Minnesota, I can't say enough wonderful things about the Minneavangelist website and Instagram feed. I follow you all on Instagram, and it's so helpful, especially with having a young child, trying to figure out, like, what should we do this weekend? So I look on Minneavangelist, like, what is there to do around here?
Llamas. There's a llama farm. You should do that way.
Yes, that's such a perfect example. Or like, which you mentioned it seems like, especially in fall, there is a festival every single weekend. Or
Even
this
in winter, there's a festival
In
every
winter,
weekend.
too.
yes, like year round. So just having you as a resource. So if anybody wants to learn more about everything that happens in Minnesota, follow Minneavangelist on Instagram or go to the website minneavangelist.com. And again, Ashlea and Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.